Hello, this is Greg Herbert, and I would like to start a new segment on my channel about books both old and new that you should read. This one is an oldie but goodie. A world leader writes an autobiography to explain his or her take on specific events that shaped the course of human history. A scientist puts his life story on paper in order to explain how he or she developed a medical process that saved millions of lives. An entertainer who never finished high school has an arrest record a mile long, and works maybe 3 months out of the year churns out an autobiography with the help of a ghostwriter, so that hundreds of thousands of his or her adoring fans can find out why this zero is worth millions. Which of these 3 autobiographies deserves our attention? If you pick the first 2, you're right on the money. I can't stand reading some book about empty souls living empty lives, especially when the book in question comes from some Hollywood loser. Even worse, imagine reading a 424-page autobiography written by a guy who isn't a Hollywood star, but a critic of Hollywood films. I can't think of anything worse than that, especially when you consider that only a small fraction of the pages deal with movies. I should have dumped this book in the trash without even cracking the front cover. If I had done that, I would have missed out on an intriguing experience. I've always enjoyed Medved on his TV movie review shows, and I enjoyed his previous political book, Hollywood vs. America. I found the story of his life to be very interesting, from the story of his grandparents leaving the Ukraine during the famine of the WWI years to his life today. I must say he has taken some rather interesting twists and turns along the way, from a liberal free-love sweet and sour pork-eating secular Jewish kid to the conservative family values kosher-keeping, Sabbath-keeping traditional Jew he is today. Right turns. Unconventional lessons from a controversial life. The autobiography of former PBS film critic turned conservative radio talk show host Michael Medved is a fascinating page-turner. Obviously, some liberal readers would rather brush their teeth with a rusty nail than spend a second reading anything the vocal Medved has to say. Those people will miss out on a story that engages in spite of the author's political opinions. Medved's story, distilled into 35 lessons, documents his odyssey from a liberal Ivy League student in the revolutionary 1960s to an unapologetic conservative in the present day. It's a journey that starts with his boisterous childhood in Pennsylvania and later California, and rapidly moves into describing in depth his ongoing struggles with his Jewish faith, his relationships with women, his admittedly minor roles in several political campaigns, raising children, how he became a film critic, Hollywood's secret agenda, and many of the movers and shakers he has met over the years. Medved briefly attended law school with Hillary Rodham, had a one-on-one chat with John Kerry about the future of a campus political organization, and learned to despise Bill Clinton back when Slick was nothing more than an Arkansas boy with a head full of dreams. We even get a full accounting of how the Golden Turkey Awards, books written by Michael and his brother Harry, came to fruition. The writing style of the book is at times self-deprecating, often humorous, and always interesting. Say what you will about Medved's political orientation, but it's tough to discount all of the important events and personages he has bore witness to in the last 40-odd years. These lessons perform a more important function than merely recounting Medved's adventures. Most of them serve as a means of explaining why conservatism is a better, healthier way of conducting one's life than liberalism. Medved recounts early events in his life that eventually led to his rejection of extremist left-wing beliefs, such as the time his uncle Moish, a Russian refugee who fled the horrors of the communist revolution in the 1920s, sat his 11-year-old nephew down and warned him about the dangers of the Scarlet Plague. The author claims this lecture made it easier for him to resist the destructive lure of latter-stage SDS and other Marxist organizations during his university career. Medved's experiences during his years living in Berkeley, he calls it basically, during that town's most chaotic period, gave him a newfound respect for cops in a time when many people used the word pigs to refer to any officer of the law. The one event that seems most influential in bringing the author over to the conservative camp was his embrace of Orthodox Judaism. As Medved's faith deepened, as he helped found a synagogue in California and shared his conservative faith with other Jews in the area, he understood how religion has a healthy impact on all facets of life. Another interesting aspect of the biography, at least for this movie lover, is Medved's all-too-brief examination of his career as a film critic and his opinions of Hollywood. Any Tinseltown insider worth his or her salt hates film critics. I would too, if I was responsible for some of the pap churned out by the studios, but they must really despise Michael Medved. He discusses here his earlier book, Hollywood vs. America, in which he argued that movie makers have a hidden agenda to produce films mocking cultural values and traditions, even if such movies lose money. 2. He offers up a spirited defense of Mel Gibson's Passion of the Christ, a film excoriated by many of his fellow Jews as anti-Semitic trash, and a movie laughed at by most of Hollywood. Rather than bashing the movie, the author instead believes it is an affirming piece of work more than deserving of its big box office stake. These opinions and attitudes have not endeared Michael Medved to the liberal establishment camped out in Los Angeles. So many coastal elites looked down on those of us primitives out in the hinterland. Not Michael. He was and is unfailingly respectful of traditional Christian/Catholic/Jewish beliefs. I mourned when he left sneak previews, but rejoiced again when Michael turned up as a cultural crusader. He had become a talk show host in Seattle. I often wondered what road he took to be where he was. Michael's life story is told in right turns. His story is remarkable in itself, but his story mirrors so many of our own life stories. People of the baby boomer generation grew up with TV, fell in love with the Democratic Party, hated conservatives and especially selfish Republicans, grew disillusioned by Vietnam. Belatedly, we discovered our religious roots, ties that many had rejected as bass. Vietnam, the darkest episode in America's history, is a war we could have and should have won. The so-called peace movement, which was in reality a dodge-the-draft movement, emerges from these pages as the destructive, dishonest force that it was. As soon as the draft was abolished, the peace movement evaporated. The pervasive anti-Americanism of the institutional left is as also explained. How did this former Democratic operative from Yale end up as proud husband and father of 3, a practicing Orthodox Jew and card-carrying conservative Republican? Right Turns is a book that informs as it entertains. I basically enjoyed the story of this book, and I would recommend it. In Michael Medved's own words, it tells the important story of his own intellectual, spiritual, philosophical, and political journey from secular Jew, left-wing activist to a devoutly religious Jew and bright, brilliant conservative thinker. It reflects one of the important threads in the fabric of the United States of America. It is well worth hearing his testimony. I heartily recommend Right Turns.